Hi, I'm Baldur Brönnimann, and this is the Conducting Coaching Podcast, where we talk about conducting from the inside. Today we'll talk about something really practical, which is conducting technique. Conducting technique is a very important aspect, and it's often discussed, obviously, especially when you're studying conducting. But I think before we delve deeper into that conversation, we have to ask ourselves a few things. So I'd like to structure this in the following way. First of all, we'll have a look at what conducting technique really is, what is meant with conducting technique. And then, we have to see what it's good for. Then we'll have to discuss, so maybe the elements or some of the elements of conducting technique. And maybe from there you can take some hints on how to improve aspects of your particular conducting technique. Now, as we established before, as a conductor, you don't really make music, you communicate music. And conducting technique is your physical way of establishing this communication. It's maybe wider than non-verbal communication in the sense that it involves many signs you have to learn and to practice, cues, fermatas, bar, figures and so on. But fundamentally, it's your way of expressing yourselves when you're not talking to the orchestra. Now, I think it's important here because my definition of conducting technique is quite wide, but sometimes one just talks about, hands and arms as being technique. I don't think that's really right, because the means of expression are much larger than just what you learn in a class when you learn to be the 4/4 or something like that. So I think we have to look at conducting technique in a much wider context. Conducting technique is about how you influence the sound, how you influence the way the people in front of you play. And good conducting technique means how efficient, how clear, how rich in information your physical communication is. If somebody has great conducting technique, they will be able to express themselves most eloquently in a sense that they will give unmistakable signs and information for the musician to process while they play. There is a physical clarity involved, a clarity, how you move your hands, how you move the baton if you conduct with one, but also how precise you articulate your feelings through your movements. So all this has to do with clarity and fundamentally with a good conducting technique. Technique, like in an instrument you play, can be learned. Conducting technique is much easier than instrumental techniques. But it's also similar to instruments, just a base for you to then use it and express yourselves with your technique. Now, I obviously think it's important to have technique. I see so many great musicians or great composers standing in front of orchestras, not really getting their ideas across or just getting them across in a really arduous way because they have no technique. And this is so easy to learn. If an orchestra is really good and they have a great sense of ensemble and they really want to work with the person in front, it might still work, but it just makes it so much easier for everybody if you just sit down and learn proper technique. It's important to put this into perspective because conducting technique is important, but it's not as important as connecting to the musicians, because you can have the best technique in the world, but if it doesn't connect, it doesn't do anything. And on the other hand, you get some musicians who have this really raw, direct contact with an orchestra, and things still work, ideas still get transmitted, and all this. So the connection is really fundamental. But a good physical technique should help you to establish this connection to the musicians easier and faster. Good technique is important to learn early on because it has to become part of your physical vocabulary. When you learn bad technique or no technique when you start to conduct, then it's very difficult to get rid of this again, because this theory about things like walking, writing, it's just movements that you've practiced a lot. It takes a long time for things to get out of your system again. So it's better to learn great conducting technique right at the beginning of your conducting education. This doesn't mean that later you can work on it, but the fundamentals, they usually come at the very beginning. These first moves you make when you learn conducting, they will stay with you. They become part of your physical system, and they have to, because when you go to the zone where you let your emotions come through, and when you stop thinking about the way you move, that's when your arms, your hands, and your body fundamentally still have to do the job of being clear and unmistakable. So the more you can integrate this into your working routine in the beginning, the better. I often tell students, practice conducting in everyday situations, just when you walk around, or, in the middle of the night, or just like in any sort of unexpected situation, that it becomes slowly part of you. Because at some stage you want to forget about technique and you just want to make music. Just as if you play the trumpet or the piano or whatever, this is just fundamentals that have to be there, and then they help you to express after. Now, obviously, to connect your technique or your physical movements to your musical ideas and to the sound you're hearing, this takes a very long time. And consequentially, often when one looks at student videos or the videos of young conductors, one sees sometimes great technique, but slightly detached from the sound or from the imagination, and then just through somebody's creative life, that's really when the technique and the thoughts really become one, when the technique really connects to the music. Furtwängler said this actually. He said, it's a very brief process to learn to conduct, but to connect the conducting to the actual music is a lifelong journey. Now let's have a look what makes good conducting technique. Let's start at the very basics. Either you will conduct with your hands or with a baton. In any case, either the hands or the baton will be your contact point to the sound. Now, if you conduct with a baton, your baton should feel like it's a natural extension of your body. You have to make the baton part of you, meaning that you have to hold it in a way that it connects naturally to your hand and to your arm, that you can articulate it easily with your fingers or your wrist, and that it feels like it's proportionate to the rest of the arm. So it means that you have to choose a baton that has a certain length that feels just like a natural extension of your arm. The way you hold it, your grip, should allow you to articulate the point of contact, which is the tip of the baton, in all the different ways that you need. I vary my grip quite a lot according to, what the music is like, what I want to express. Some people have a more consistent grip or a firmer grip, but in the end, the grip should just allow you to operate on a really detailed level with your baton, to steer this instrument really finely and to allow for it to express what you want to get across and to connect the music in a most eloquent way. Now, the same goes if you conduct without a baton, if you conduct with your hands. Then the point of contact with the sound are your fingertips, and you have to make sure that these fingertips are really articulated. Sometimes I see people conducting with the hands, and the hands move in a certain way, but the fingertips, they are just sort of a bit neutral, or there's nothing happening there. And you have to make sure that the fingertips are really touching the sound, they're really transmitting, because that's where this point of connection really is. These points of contact are really important. They're sort of the last element, it's like the eyes, the fingertips or the tip of the baton. It's the end of the communication chain in a certain way, is what connects your thoughts to the sound. So it's really important that you articulate these points. Sometimes I see people conduct with a baton, and the baton really just sticks in the hand somehow. So what they do is they conduct with the arm or sometimes with the hands or so. But if the tip of the baton is not articulated, it will always make them feel slightly detached from the sound, however nicely you swing your arms. But you have to articulate your points of contact, because they give you this eloquence and this direct relation to the sound. The next element of technique is the way you move. Your arms will be, or they should be, in constant motion. There will be ictuses, more emphasized ones, more sustained ones, just according to the music, of course. But what is important is what happens in between the impulses or the ictuses, because your line indicates always where the next ictus is going to fall. So that constant speeding up, or that flexibility in your line, this makes you, on one hand, always connected to the sound, and it makes clear what is happening tempo-wise, like where the next beat is going to fall, and you can prepare, not just, timing-wise, but all the information you need with the line in between the beats. Your body position is important. Ideally this will be a stance that allows you to move freely and effortlessly. And this obviously depends on your body, because the center of your communication should be your solar plexus. And this should be visible to everybody. So maybe your stance should be something like, like embracing somebody, but just your arms in a resting position, your shoulders relaxed and so on, like a neutral and organic position in relation to yourselves that then allows you to express everything that the music needs. Good technique means also to be really specific. Your information, or the main part of your information, should come from your points of contact, which is the tip of your baton, the tip of your fingers, or your eyes. And everything else has to be there just if you use it. So for example, don't double your movements always with the right and the left hand, because it takes away attention. It makes you less clear. And the same goes for your body, because sometimes I see people conducting with your body or doing something different with their body than they do with their hands or their baton. And what it does is it takes away the attention from your point of contact, and it makes you less clear. Just use the body or the left hand or anything else, in fact, if you really want to use it for something, if there is something to say. Then, of course, conducting technique is always relative, because it always depends on what you have in front. You can't just practice to conduct something really beautifully and really articulate and then just apply this to the music, because your conducting technique will always address what comes from the orchestra. This is what makes sometimes students or young conductors who have great training look a little bit choreographed, because it feels like they learned their movements or they learned their technique, but it doesn't really connect. It doesn't really address what's happening in front. They're conducting in a certain way too much what the orchestra is playing, instead of conducting what they should be playing or what they imagine they should play. So what I want to say with this is, of course, conducting is not simply about swinging your arms in a very nice way or looking great on a podium. It's about the way you affect the sound. And that's what you need conducting technique for. If an orchestra or a group sounds great, there will be something that you will have done right. Some people will say, okay, maybe it didn't really depend on the conductor. I think it does. Sometimes it's more also personal connection. It's not even related to how you move and so on. But conducting technique is a very wide issue. It's about the quality of your communication to the orchestra. And there are certain elements that you can practice in this and that you have to practice, and others that you have to experience. And all of this together, in the end, this makes great conducting technique. Thanks for listening. To send us your comments or suggestions, please write us a message on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date with all the conducting coaching news and events.